Yo, 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 what's up, Infinity? What you doing, bro?
Nothing about you.
Not much, bro. Just going into my room because this nigga pinged me at like 8:48 p.m. to debate. So I'm up, tired, and ready to debate.
So, I have to do my homework.
Shit, alright. Trying to do your homework in this bill. Oh yeah, you ready to debate or something like that?
Yeah, you can pick a topic.
Yeah. So what propositions do you like engage in? Just so I have a list of like to go off. Like, do you do meta ethics?
Yeah, sure.
Are you a moral realist or anti-realist?
I mean, I'm a moral relativist, so anti-realist, I guess.
So
I'll just defend
Wait,
moral.
wait. To be clear, you do relativist. That isn't really like it is like a subjectivist, but not really like an anti-realist. Like anti-realist posits like one more entity, not one more entity, just one entity, while relativist would just posit like several other like entities, which of course have that grounding for normatives. Sorry. But yeah. But anyways, not to argue on definitions. Sure, we can debate. I'll just take a subjectivist stance where I think morals are, of course, not really like, where, oh yeah, we, ground for norms and that's the moral standard, but more so our own morals would dictate, obviously in a metaphysical sense where, oh yeah, morals are subjected to our own appearance and
Well,
won't really
yeah,
do anything. So, would you like to give an argument for a relativist position?
well, you said subjective in what sense? What's the whole thing?
I said subjective in that sense it dictates our own morals, our own. Just so you know, when you say subjectivist, it just refers to one entity, not necessarily in a relativist stance where it refers to a societal or normative factor for like a large group of people. For moral truths through culture and shit like that. So, if you want, you can go ahead and make an
Yeah,
argument for
so
that.
I never said I was a cultural relativist. I just said I was a relativist. I could be a total relativist until there would just be no disagreement.
So you do realize relativist regardless, like first of
Oh
all,
my God,
regardless.
bro.
Okay, oh my god, man. So regardless about that point, more relativist would have to have some type of normative through, of course. Like it doesn't have to be culture. It just depends on normative things. I mean, like normative things through, culture of a person, of course, multiple like moral consensus and shit like that. Those are like normative things.
Yeah, I just said I don't have to hold to
But you
it
just said you're a
being
relativist.
defined by consensus. Yeah, that just assumes there is individual relativism and then there's cultural relativism, like I said. So under like an individual relativistic stance, then obviously it would be the case that there is no disagreement within our two stances because both of them would actually just entail that morality is defined by each person individually and not just by any consensus. So there just
Yeah,
is a disagreement unless you want to assume.
there is a
Uh,
disagreement because, like,
alright.
first of all, when you refer to relativist works in moral truths and would adhere to consensus. That's like things within normative based things. Wait,
Yeah, I
you
just
are
said that
hold on, hold on.
relativism doesn't have to adhere to that. That's literally what I just said. There's individual
I'm
relativism,
asking you a
which
question.
doesn't care about consensus, and so you're not actually attacking anything.
Okay, so you are aware of like what a normative thing is, right?
I never said I was giving normative ethical position. Obviously, it was it's a meta-ethical position. It would just be that morality is defined by something completely subjective. And so obviously I wouldn't be adhering to any consensus. So once again, I don't see why we have to actually do all of
Yeah.
this. I could actually take
So
a stance that completely opposes yours and then just defend that because this just seems like a non-point to me without any substance.
it would be kind of the substance because I think you're
Not
confused about
really.
the question. So, and one
Yeah,
of the
you can.
yeah, hold on, let me finish. Like, don't do this cutting off crap because that's annoying. But when it comes to like certain things, of course, like relativist things, when I take it to be, of course, a relativist position, I would sit there and say, oh, yeah, you cannot have some type of relativism without, of course, some type of thing setting a standard for a moral. So, obviously, when you take into a relativist account, I would think there has to be something in place for us to even determine that. And I think that would go for other people as well. Like, it doesn't just like when I refer to relativism, right, to get the analytics clear, right, I think there would have to be something intuition based. Like, when I say intuition based as well, obviously it would have to refer to where someone, oh yeah, there's a certain thing which, oh yeah, I believe is immoral. So obviously sitting there, I can set up a standard, and I think that would influence a larger group of people as well. I mean, like, yeah, you could say individually that would influence each other individual person, and that could refer to their set of moral like frameworks. But as a whole, in that collection, I think the normative standard has to like work. That's what I mean. You have to have some type of societal group because there's a large number of people who adhere to that specific moral because it's normative. It would influence a lot of other people. So I think when you acquire relativism, you would also have to account to them. Like if you were acquired to a specific person or individual relativism, in itself, that's just some type of subjectivist like stance. That's just saying, oh yeah, subjectively, this is morally the case, you know. And obviously, when you refer to metaphysical theses, this would say, oh yeah, in the universe, this is the case that it's subjective and not objective, therefore mind dependent. So relativism still requires, of course, consideration for the normative itself. It does not matter about the person. I'm trying to account for the moral, normative, and that's obviously going to influence a lot of other people unless you have an argument for a moral that won't influence a lot of other people, you know? So I think the definition for the substance of your stance matters a lot to evade conflationalist things. So go ahead.
Oh, holy shit. I mean, obviously, if one believes something to be true, also I would have to actually hold some sort of normativity or some sort of bearing across other people or whatever they believe to be true as well, or whatever they believe to be moral. Because once again, right, I just said my definition of relativism is essentially the same as your definition of subjectivism, where there is no normative bearing and everything's indexed to each moral agent. So once again, right, if all of these counter arguments that you claim to be given are essentially just counter arguments against your position, because I just defined my position as what you define your position to be as. So once again, I don't see why we would need to continue engaging with this. I could just take a more objectivist point and we can actually engage with the substance rather than going on this semantic non-point.
Okay, so
I don't really have.
one more
Yeah.
thing before we move on, right? So
Mhm.
again, you referred to subjectivism, that's one entity in one moral like framework. So that's the reason why I said when you refer to relativism, that's the reason why you also have to give a normative, which would obviously adhere to multiple other people. That's what you have to consider. But when you say, oh yeah, I just define it as you to be, your own position, not exactly, because first of all, of course, your subjective state thing, your subjectivism, it's like individual relativism is to a specific point of a person. Like there are morals and questions on morals itself, right? But relativism acquires the normative for a specific framework, so it's already there. I mean, like that's the point, and that's like the final point we can end this like type point on the semantic point, so we can actually engage in the substance about obviously the metaphysical premises here. So I mean, like you can go ahead and give an argument
Yeah.
here.
So I think this entire like tangent was just completely irrelevant because yeah, I'll just take a more objectivist points so the
Yeah, no,
lines between the
great
two
argument.
stances will be clear. So yeah, I'll just justify moral objectivism by essentially if um if a God exists, then morality has to follow from said God. God or it has to be grounded within said God. God exists, therefore morality has to be grounded within said God. which gives an objective basis or an objective standard, which essentially just makes more the truth value of moral propositions independent of human whatever humans believe it is. So yeah,
So,
do you have any
uh,
contentions?
yeah, I do. I do. First of all,
Okay.
uh, bless you, bless you, bless you. By the way, um,
Thank you, man.
so, yeah,
Bessie.
so when you say, "Oh yeah, morality is grounded within God," yet, like, yes, you did say that, or no? Just for clarification.
Yeah, I said I gave a conditional. I said if God exists, then morality has to
Okay,
be
yeah,
grounded within
yeah. I'm
God.
talking. I'm talking about, like, let's just say, for example, we can accept God exists, right? I'm a theist, so,
Sure,
like, I'm just devil's advocating for the fuck of it. But
sure.
regardless of that specific belief, let's just talk about the conversation, not meta. So let's just talk about, if it is the case that God exists, right? Morality is grounded within Him. So are you taking it to be like some type of ontological characteristic of God? Or are you talking about something that is, of course, going to be reflective in, of course, the states of what we know the world as, and that would also be reflected within him. So are you saying our morality is the same as God's, or are you saying we have some type of imperfect morality where God has perfect morality, but we're trying to make it towards God, saying like, oh yeah, we have to be moral, virtuous beings, but clearly we don't have the standard to do that, but God does. So are you trying to make distinctions? Are you trying to say, oh yeah, it's the same here, it's reflective, very, asking questions which are important towards your argument or model. Go ahead.
Yeah. So when I say that morality is grounded within God, obviously I'm just referring to God being the objective standard, and so under my definition or under my semantics of God, God would be all good or omnibenevolent, and so anything which, or actually, you could go by any religion, but actually, I'll just go without actually delving into religion, but anything which is contrary to God's nature, I guess, would just be something which is not good, or anything which is distinct from God's omnibenevolence would just be what is considered not good or what is considered evil. For example, you believe that God created human beings, that God created everything. So God assigned value to human beings by giving us some sort of rational capacity. And so obviously we could derive from that killing a human being or ending a human being just disregards the value which God has implanted within the human being, and therefore it would be morally impermissible. So that's how we can just derive all the truth values of all moral odds and everything. So it would just be something which is grounded or something which is uh, essentially just grounded within God or it's derived from God.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. So, obviously you took an Immanuel Kantist, or just took the Kantian view on like some type of like meta-ethical stance. I mean, that's
I have
perfectly
no
right.
idea what that is,
Yeah,
but sure,
it's just a philosopher's, way of trying to argue for meta-ethics, but that doesn't
sure.
really matter. So, but mainly speaking wise, I think if we were trying to assign, oh yeah, God's morality to our morality, I think our morality is imperfect. And I think that would create large amounts of category errors unless you say, oh yeah, our morality is
Wait,
contingent.
what do
He
you
is.
think? Wait,
Wait, hold
wait,
on,
what do
hold
you
on,
think?
hold on.
No,
I'm trying
I
to finish.
need to ask this. Sorry. I'm trying to get this clarification point before you go ahead, so I don't strawman. What do you take a category error to be? Because you
My
say
category.
there are a lot of category
Why would
errors, but
you?
there
Why
is
would you need?
nothing which implies some sort of category error, at least by the conventional definition.
Well, you do
So,
realize that I wasn't finished giving my point, and if I was to
yeah,
finish, you can see where the category is coming from, or unless you can sit there and clarify the point after I do make the category error assertion. So, would you like me to finish so you can go ahead and give a counterfactual, or would you like to go into an argument or a meta point about what a category is considered by Immanuel?
I'm not going into an argument or a meta debate about what a category error is.
Okay, then we can
I
sit
just
here and we can
asked you.
finish.
I just asked you a clarification point because obviously I don't give a fuck what you think it means. It's just how you're using it or how you're implementing it, and so it would still be a flaw in reason. So there would be no reason to actually engage within meta debate on that. But obviously, for me to understand your point, I would need to understand the semantics you're making use of. So you can just define a category error and then continue with what you were saying.
Yeah, you do realize that, like, I was trying to finish the point which makes the category
Or
assertion, and that gives you the definition. I mean, it's pretty formal about what it is, but I mean, like, after I'm done with the point, I'm pretty sure you can sit there and derive where the category error is coming from. And, like, I think I'm just using a conventional definition for category error. I don't really see any type of, like, oh, yeah, you're
sure,
not using it right because the point's not even finished in the first place. I mean,
I
you
understand you're
wanted to,
not using
okay,
right.
wait. You wanted a clarification question when I wasn't even done with the point. So I mean, like, that's like, I'm not really gonna comment on that, but I'm just gonna continue so we can not, not waste time.
Sure, I really
So
think you're using the conventional definition, but sure.
my guy, I wasn't even finished with the point, but all right.
Yeah,
So like,
continue.
yeah. So like, when you say the morality is grounded in God, are you referring to like perfect morality for God? Because like, I think your answer was more too focused on the ontology of God rather than the focus on, oh yeah, if are we saying God has the same morality as us, or is it indexing towards us? Because God has the of course morality is indexed towards us. It's the standard for morality. So are you trying to, of course, take some type of conflationist thing, which asserts that, oh yeah, so this morality would obviously contain or be applied to this specific substance, which is, going to be our morality, so X equals X in that sense. But mainly speaking wise, can you just clarify, like, are you trying to say the morality comes from God, therefore contingent upon God? Or are you saying, oh yeah, because it's within God, it would reflect, like, I just want a clear answer, like yes or no. Is it reflecting from God or is it coming from God?
I mean, yeah, I have no idea what you're saying about perfect imperfect morality. I think what my explanation was clear enough. Obviously, I explained what it means for you to say that morality is grounded within God. I don't know what you mean by
Okay, so
perfect and
not to cut
imperfect
you off,
morality.
not to
So
cut you off,
wait,
okay,
wait.
not to do that because like I think I gotta state something for you to properly like answer the question again because like my bad, I think that was on my part. So to be good faith, I want to like fulfill something again. Um, what I mean by because like you say you don't know what I mean by reflecting. I think when it comes to reflecting, are you trying to sit there and say their morality would be a Cambridge attribute? Are you aware of the analytics for a Cambridge attribute?
No idea, but I could just once again I could just re-explain it to you, and so because
No,
obviously it would
no,
be
no,
very
no.
clear to
Because like
derive
no,
the
because
answer for whatever that
I
question would
need
be.
you to I need you to understand this. I need you to understand this because like it's very important to the dialectic in my point. So, and a Cambridge attribute would be something, of course, like say for example, if I have like, are you aware of what reflexive semantics are?
I mean, you can just explain them to me. Anything
Yeah,
you
yeah.
want to ask, yeah, you can
Sure,
just explain.
I'll explain it. Yeah. So let's just say I'm formally ontologically describing God. So descriptor for God. Obviously, God being a necessary being is obviously going to be reflexive within the semantics. So if I say, oh, yeah, God is necessary, it's going to have to be symmetrical with the actual thing of God because it's supposed to be descriptively true. So that's what I mean by reflexive semantics. Like, is obviously speaking wise, is the morality of God supposed to be a Cambridge attribute where it's going to be symmetrical or, of course, correspondent to humans, and God has the same morality as humans? Or, obviously speaking, is the objective morality supposed to be within our, world, supposed to be God's? Is it the same as God's? The same ontology? Is it supposed to be identical towards one another? That's what I mean for the question. Like, are you trying to say the same thing corresponds towards that? Because obviously your explanation was, God assigns us morality and anything contrary towards his, morality would obviously adhere to contrary things, right? So are you trying to say it has to be identical towards morality? Yes or no?
I think you agree with me, but that's besides the point. The entire thing is that when we say God or morality is objective in the sense of God, we're essentially just saying that God is the set of rules or the set of moral rules that we ought to follow. And so anything which deviates from these rules occurs contrarily to these rules, which is something which is morally impermissible or something which is morally wrong. So obviously, it would just be the case that God's morality or whatever is good within God, yeah, is whatever would be good or whatever would be morally permissible and index to our morality. So, because once again, it's subjective, not subjective.
Yeah,
So,
that just like answers my question. So I'm gonna go on and spot the category error as I was trying to do earlier. So I think because there's also evil moral predicates within humans, because obviously, killing a human being happens in our world, and that's of course like factual. And I don't think there's like counterfactual. So I think there's imperfect morality within humans. I don't think it should be, of course, specifically, what do I say right here? Of course, it's not perfect. So it cannot be perfect if it's imperfect. And I think evil things being done by humans would have to require them to live up to this standard rather than objectively having this standard. So I think it would also just depend on their actions and what the rationale would, of course, approach in. So I think even that when if God were to grant rational capacity towards humans, I think he would let them decide, of course, through free will and shit like that, instead of objectively having these. And I think you would have to meet up towards them instead of course, being objectively moral. And I think depend upon themselves, obviously, because of that imperfect morality. So, is there any type of refutation towards humans having imperfect morality, which would go against, of course, perfect morality, going in the sense God is all good and omnibenevolent? Is there any contrary thing?
all right, yeah. So this just doesn't attack anything. I said God would be like instead of in the sense of morality, God would just be the set of rules which humans ought to follow. So if a human action is correspondent with these rules, then obviously the action would be morally good. If it's contrary to these rules, then obviously the action would be wrong or be bad, would be evil. And so the entire point is that the whatever we deem to be evil is simply just or evil is simply just the absence of good. It's not actually like a positive element. And so it's defined by something which occurs contrarily to the objective moral standard, which is what I'm positing. So it whatever you were saying just doesn't go through. And so for the rational capacity point, obviously if we have free will, which obviously I'm not gonna dispute, I believe that we have free will. Obviously the free will will just be it will just be the case that we have the free will to either do something which is good or do something which is morally wrong. And so I don't see why having free will would have to entail that morality is subjective or having irrational capacity and moral agency would just mean that morality would have to be subjective or would be determined by a set of factors or whatever
Yeah.
humans decide to do at that point. So the entire point is that there can still exist an objective moral standard, and then there would be free will to either follow this standard and be a morally decent person or be a good person by virtue, or um, deviate from that standard and just be like a morally bad person or whatever, or what we call an evil person.
Yeah, so to give a counterfactual, I think them having free will to decide what moral framework they are following, I think that just makes objective truths interchangeable in that sense because it just grants a subjectivist view where morals are dependent. I mean, like, that's obviously by the analytics of a subjectivist. And I think more so if you were to say, oh, yeah, there is an objective grounding, then I could just sit there and say, oh, yeah, because obviously it wouldn't make sense if humans are supposed to be evil creatures constantly following evil or inconsistently having good and shit like that. Because like obviously that would make it deterministic in that sense where humans have to be good or have to be bad in that sense. But them having
Wait,
free will,
what?
wait. Them having free will, and of course, having a deterministic outlook where they sit there and follow, of course, an objectively good thing by rationality, or of course, bad things would obviously determine that. Oh yeah, this leads up to, of course, your argument, and the argumentation follows that it has this within the model because of God's existence, willing it to be this way, and of course, obviously, consistent factors through rationale, the processes being deterministic. I think even then, them having free will to choose moral frameworks still fits the analytical criteria or just analytical thing for a subjectivist. Like if you're trying to accept, oh yeah, there's some type of objectivist thing, and then sitting there saying, oh yeah, there's subjectivist because of human will. Obviously speaking, when the secondary or counterfactual objective option is more likely to happen, not more likely to happen, but can still happen, of course, like the evil thing. I think even then that still makes moral truths interchangeable because concretely we still see evil things being done consistently, this and that. And I don't think those, of course, moral laws or just the set of moral laws being given to, the rationale of humans would fit them actually being given to the humans for moral goodness or to follow moral goodness. I think it would just have to be, of course, the immoral truths, immoral truths in that sense. So I don't think there's any type of moral truths that are, moral in that sense if humans are to still follow immoral truths whilst also following, immoral goodness, because not immoral goodness, what the fuck am I talking about? Moral goodness, if they're to sit there and of course follow this specific thing, follow that, just interchangeable as I mentioned, because obviously there's a conflationist with the concrete thing, and of course, mind dependent thing, specifically speaking, because morals are not meant to be chosen. They're supposed to be concrete and of course through rational agency. They're supposed to be deterministic, but if they're free will, there's gonna be a conflationist thing between that. And I think that sums up most of my points. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that just isn't attacking anything begs the question, but yeah, I don't see why I would have to adhere to like some sort of analytic view which corresponds with subjectivism, because the entire point is going against subjectivism. So yeah, free will once again can still exist whilst having objective moral standards. Like just take for example rules in school, for example, right? Just because those rules exist doesn't mean that everyone's gonna follow those rules. Like I don't think they're most of the time, right? They have the rational capacity to determine, make choices for themselves, but that doesn't mean that those choices are gonna be right objectively or they're gonna be wrong objectively. It just means due to like what they're saying, but it just means that the rightness or wrongness is going to be determined by something which is independent of them, which is the entire case that I'm making. So sure, a person can subjectively think that what they're doing is right or what they're doing is wrong within that context, but that would just be irrelevant to my entire point, which would just be that objectively it wouldn't actually correspond with this standard which I'm going for. Obviously, the standard being God, which I've already made the argument for and have given the justification for. So if it doesn't correspond, then obviously it's just something which is objectively wrong, even though it can be subjectively moral and they can subjectively see themselves as a good person. Also, even under subjectivism, a person would still be deterministically a good or evil person, unless you're gonna try to make the claim that whatever is good is gonna be something which a human perceives as good, which obviously would just mean that there is no moral evil in that. I just don't see any motivation to believe in that. But yeah, once again,
Yeah, just
whether you have subjectivism or objectivism, you still have determined good people or bad people depending on whether or not they actually follow that subjective or objective standard.
yeah. So go ahead and then, pursue in that specific. One thing I want to note about, I wasn't making a claim about, sitting there saying, oh yeah, it has to be objectively deterministic. Of course, because I already granted that it goes through rational processes, and that's what makes it deterministic because it follows up from, determined things, of course, specifically the rational processes, which is just subjective experience, of course. I mean, like, I don't know why you would sit there and say, oh yeah, you're gonna sit there and make that claim despite me already granting the
No, that's
contrary.
not what I said.
Anyways,
That's not what I said.
anyways, speaking wise, mainly to the point, I said that if they're capable of choosing morals to follow, and of course, morals are supposed to be subjective to a person. Analytically speaking, a subjectivist, moral truths would be considered to them, of course, subjective, or just their morals would have to be morally true through subjective means. That's still analytically the case because that's the stance and that fulfills the said person. So obviously that's going to be descriptively true per definition. So anyways, going past the specific other points you mentioned. Of course, when you say, "Oh yeah, you can have specific people who could choose," which because it's independent and shit like that. Yeah, independent things. Which when it comes to moral things, and of course when it comes to God independently, of course, cannot have any type of change. Of course, the obviously, I think what I should have put into question here was the existence of God in the first place. But that would just drag the argument down into some type of, theological argument. But going back to the, oh yeah, independent cases, I'm saying that if a person can choose or make up all other moral things, of course, which can still be considered moral in a subjective chance or just subjective framework or view, some type of subjective worldview, then the morals which are considered are not absolute in the first place, where they still make up concretely, oh yeah, these are objectively good. Like, firstly, again, what I want to ask is, what do you consider that's like objectively good? Because, like, of course, when you said, oh yeah, you gave an example, which would be, oh yeah, killing a human being, that's immoral, considered of God. You can go through religion for that. But that's just, of course, affirming some type of omnibenevolence chance for God. And then you sat there and said, oh yeah, God is also the set of moral rules, but you also inquired, or just, of course, stated that there's plural rules. So, what I want to learn is, what other moral rules would you grant that, of course, are, of course, God's moral law for them to follow? So, what are the other laws if you're going to invoke something that's plural, of course? So, again,
Yeah,
the points I want to list down for you, to just in case you're not tracking because I'm yapping too long, or of course what you consider to be yapping too long. I'm going to summarize them for you, and I want you to blatantly attack them. Of course, the analytical truth part, of course, speaking wise by definition, it's descriptively true because morals can be seen as, of course, moral in the sense of a subjective perspective, and that would, of course, disprove concretely, oh yeah, these are morally good in that fact, because again, there's choices to be indexed towards specific morals, which can exist, which of course means they're dependent or chosen dependently, dependently by subjectivist experience, right? So that fits the criteria, or just of course the descriptively true definition of a subjectivist. Secondly, the point I want to make was that, oh yeah, I already granted, it's deterministic through rational processes, subjectivist things. Is there any type of thing which I messed up on there? And thirdly, what are your other moral rules for God? Because you said God can be considered as what's moral in that sense and perfectly moral, because you affirmed omnibenevolence. And when you're talking about God, you cannot have anything that's, of course, messing up or imperfect, because again, then they are omnibenevolent in that sense, because obviously there's imperfection that limits the morals to, potentially evil stuff or potential to change. So one thing I want to list is, what are your other morals? That's the question I want answered first.
yeah, I don't need to answer that question because obviously, if I'm basing it off of God, omnibenevolence, obviously, it was
Yeah,
just
what are the
dragged down
moral
to
rules for God? What are the
volition.
moral
Yeah,
rules? What are the
yeah.
moral
So
rules?
just, oh my God, yeah, it will just go down to either some sort of religion argument, or it will just be it is like the semantics of what exists objectively. And so once again, right, I don't need to answer that question. It just seems like a red herring. His high point is
That's
that
not a
those
red
rules.
herring.
No, no,
How
it is right. No, listen,
you
listen, listen. Don't cut me off. Don't cut me
you
off. Don't
invoke
cut me off. I let you speak for
just
10 minutes. I let you
No,
speak
I ain't
for
gonna
ten
lie,
minutes.
yeah, no, I ain't gonna lie. You did speak for a long time, Chip. Cutting them off. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. So essentially, I don't need to answer the question because what's in question, or the entire point of the debate or of contention, is whether or not those rules exist in the first place, which will just be dependent on whether or not God exists. And so, if God exists, then obviously there has to be some sort of objective rules or some set of objective rules which exist, which are derived from God or corresponded with whatever aligns with God's nature. So obviously, I wouldn't need to specifically define what those rules are, but the entire point is that those rules exist. So that's the first thing. Secondly, sure, you could say that subjectively, one person could determine something to be moral, but that once again, that's irrelevant to my point because subjectivity would actually be irrelevant to something which is objectively the case that it's immoral, right? Because I could say that, for example, I could kill someone for revenge, right? And I would say that oh, it's morally justified due to the circumstances. I did it to get back at the person for them, perhaps killing someone else or for some other wrong thing that they did, and so it will be moral to me. But the entire point is that even considering the law and other independent factors, for example, like my objectivist stance, sorry, yeah, it would still be wrong, and so whatever I think personally would be completely irrelevant to that. So once again, those two things can actually coexist, right? So this person can subjectively believe something to be morally permissible, whilst objectively it's not morally permissible; it's morally impermissible. So it'll just be the case that the person is wrong, or the person's rational deliberations are wrong within that context due to the conclusion which they derived that being that X action is morally permissible would not correspond with the actual set of rules or wouldn't correspond with God's nature, which is all good. Yeah, you can
Yeah,
speak now.
yeah. I'll just give a kind of back point firstly. So of course, when you talk about morals specifically existing, right? And you're saying, oh yeah, it's concretely existing, blah 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 blah. Yeah, you're saying it's independent, but clearly, if morals are capable of being chosen upon, then morals should be interchangeable. I mean, like regardless, that's still reductive to the point about it being concrete and independent or mind independent. That leads to a metaphysical contradiction and a conflationist stance about that, because there's assumed there's no distinction with the existence of those two. But of course, there are distinctions between those two, very heavy metaphysical distinctions, right? So, firstly, to the other point about it being a red herring, if you're defining God as, of course, being, hold on, sorry, of course, being God, being the set of moral rules to follow that are objective. If you don't give a set of objective laws to follow, then there should be well, you gave an example, but you invoked plurality. If you're invoking plurality, that means there has to be a set of laws. Otherwise, I don't see how that's descriptively true towards God, which of course denies the conditional for God existing, because the consequent would be those moral laws existing. Because if you don't grant some type of dude, I didn't even speak for 44 seconds, bro. I was timing
No,
that,
I
by the way.
didn't. Yeah,
Anyways,
I didn't.
specifically speaking about, God's specific thing, the conditional for God existing, the consequent, of course, speaking wise, is just, oh yeah, moral laws existing. If there's like a lack of course, plural things in question for that denies the consequent, which of course the conditional shouldn't make sense for it to follow. That's just basic modus talens. It's
Yo,
just basic stuff.
Alright,
My
yeah,
bad for
so
You said it's
pronunciation.
basic what?
I
It's,
think
it's
he's
basic.
meant to say modus tollens, but he said
Huh.
modus talens. Yeah,
Yo,
we can
Listen,
just.
you don't know
Are you
how to
done? Are you
pronounce it
done?
Boogie,
right.
No,
yo,
no. Are you?
If you
Benno.
want
I don't
pronunciation or
know, bro.
clarification, at the end, I can give that because you guys were confused. Maybe I don't know because my pronunciation.
No, no, no. I understand. But are you
Okay,
done?
then go ahead. Because do you want to conclude after you
Yeah.
make your final point?
Yeah, we can conclude. After this. I was about to suggest that.
Yeah, after
All
you
right.
give your
Yeah.
point,
So.
because I'm gonna let you speak because I don't think it's
Mhm.
fair for me to yap and then you not give your point. But go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah. So for the entire point about like the modus tollens point, yeah, that just doesn't work because you're essentially backtracking on your earlier position, which is agreed that God exists, and even you earlier within this conversation again said that you probably should have put into question God's existence, but it's whatever, right? So you already granted that God exists, and so you just can't backtrack at a later point within this conversation and say that, oh, I'm gonna deny God existing by saying, oh, the consequence is false, and so the antecedent must be false as well. So that just doesn't work, right? And also, once again, I do not need to define the specific set of rules because from the premise which you agree to, which is that God exists, and within my semantics of God is simply that He's all good and He's the designator of moral value and rational capacity and moral agency. And obviously, there would have to exist an objective set of rules which are either derived from Him or essentially just correspondent with His good nature. So anything which is contrary to that was considered morally impermissible. This is a subjectivity point once again. Something a person being able to choose like I don't even know what you said. A person be able to choose like some set of morality or what they believe to be moral. Once again, would still be completely independent of what is actually moral, which will just be correspondent with what exists objectively, which would be independent of their rational capacity or their rational deliberations. So if like there exists two choices, right? Choice X is morally permissible and choice Y is morally impermissible, and a person chooses choice X or a person chooses choice Y, which is morally impermissible, and claims that it's moral for them, then obviously it will be subjectively moral for them, but that doesn't mean that it's something which gains some sort of actual moral permissibility objectively, right? Because it doesn't correspond with whatever would be morally permissible. So once again, it just wouldn't follow that due to some subjective access or epistemological access to those objective truths, then that would follow that those objective truths are actually subjective. So choice doesn't actually imply subjectivity in the sense that the truths themselves are subjective. Choice just implies subjectivity in the sense that someone can choose to do something which is morally right or morally wrong. Now you can give your conclusions if you feel the need to, and I can give mine afterwards.
Well, I'll just give like a guess. We don't have any guts. I guess you could go off consensus for the debate for whoever comments if it's getting uploaded. Like, do you give consent for this to go on YouTube or no?
You can post it on YouTube. Sure. I don't know.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you before I do anything that like you don't like or anything. But
No.
just for the conclusion, I just want to sit there and state that for the subjective point, when I said, oh yeah, it's interchangeable. When I say, of course, if morals are supposed to be, of course, specifically, descriptively true and then acquired through subjectivist experience, I think morals as a whole are supposed to be interchangeable because obviously, if you can choose a moral by choice and you're sitting there and saying by choice, and you sit there and say through rational capacity, sitting there and saying that you took a Kantian view on that, and then of course, moral sitting there speaking wise, and you say, okay, well, I could just give an example to sum this up. If I sat there and said this specific moral system is true, but then there's a specific other moral system which is contrary, and this also happens to be viewed as true in this specific light, I think the choice to that is specifically just going to be morally true because of a subjective experience, not through objectivity where it concretely exists as a principle for morality in that case. I think for the God point, I think because if you're sitting there saying God exists, but then you're also defining God as a moral set of laws, and you don't give those set of laws for you to sit there and grant for the consequence of these moral laws being the case. I also think because I also mentioned the category point error. I think like whatever's contrary is supposed to be a moral for us to follow. I think that also places God's morality, to be specifically categorized as an error because that solely belongs to God's ontology, not us. So I think, of course, there's predicates for imperfect immorality, and um, then back to the moral just set of descriptions. Then I don't think that version of God is descriptively true, and I don't think it's accurate for God to be dubbed as that. That's the reason why I think that's important to be put in question. One final point I want to say is that you said, "Oh yeah," because you know, I, happen to say, "Oh yeah, I agree with God existing." I said, "Yeah, I'm a theist, but for the hell of it, I could just devil's advocate throughout the conversation. I'm not going to get into a meta, discussion about my beliefs or dogmatic states." So that's also in the recording. I can probably find the timestamp, but those are my conclusions. I don't think that's a backtrack, so I think mainly that's my just the conclusion for the conversation for me, my part.
Right. Yeah. So first of all, if you say that you're not gonna get into a discussion on the specific thing that you're saying you're devil's advocating on, then obviously it would just be a concession to the fact that you're granting that premise to go through, which is that God exists. So you already denied uh to engage on that specific sub points, which would be on whether or not God exists, which is the concession. Secondly, right, for the subjectivity and the objectivity point, obviously, sure, two distinct people, X and Y, can believe in two contrasting moral frameworks, and which sure that could be the case. Once again, I said things can be subjectively true, but objectively, it just wouldn't be morally right or morally wrong, which is what actually defines true moral rightness or wrongness, or true moral permissibility and impermissibility. So they can believe in two contrasting moral frameworks, but the outer moral framework which corresponds with the set of laws or the objective set of laws, moral odds, which once again are grounded within God, then obviously it would just be the case that that specific system is going to be objectively moral rather than the other system, which is seen as subjectively moral but would not necessarily be objectively moral due to the lack of correspondence. Uh, what was the last point? Yeah, for the having to define the laws. Yeah, I never said that God is a specific set of laws. I said that in the case of morality, right, God would refer to a specific set of laws due to the fact that those laws or the moral odds or the laws which define morality are going to be derived from him or going to be grounded within him. So when I say God is a specific set of laws, I'm simply just saying that those laws are objective due to them being grounded within an objective entity, which is God. So you just didn't track that point. So now, yeah, we can just end the recording here.
Before you end it, just GG, I guess. GG, just to be good sport.
Yeah, okay. GG.